My parents tried to give my inheritance to their golden daughter, but my grandparents had a surprising twist in store. The male 28-year-old hails from a family with a complicated and long history of favoritism. My younger sister Amy, 25, has always been chosen by my parents, particularly my father, over me. This predilection began in childhood and only worsened as we grew older. Amy was the golden child in my early memories. When I was 5 and she was 2 years old, our parents threw her an elaborate birthday party complete with professional face painters, a bouncy castle, and a petting zoo. That year, I celebrated my birthday with a store-bought cake and a little family lunch. This helped set the tone for years to come. As we grew older, the disparities became clearer. Amy always got the coolest toys, the best clothes, and the most attention. I remember saving months of allowance for a new bike when I was 10 years old. Amy wanted one as well, so when she saw it, she threw a fit. Rather than teaching her about waiting and saving, my parents went out and bought her an even nicer bike than mine. Another area where bias was visible was in education. Amy's parents attended all of her school festivities, whereas they usually missed mine. In 4th grade, I played the lead role in the school play. I practiced for weeks with considerable enthusiasm. My parents arrived an hour late on the night of the performance, so they missed my key scene. They consoled Amy after she complained of a stomach ache. She was fine later on. They had simply lost track of the time they spent playing with her. In terms of academics, nothing I did seemed to enough. I joined the math club, got straight A's in middle school, and even won first place in a regional science fair. Though my parents were unconcerned about Amy's accomplishments, they offered her a celebratory supper and a new phone as encouragement to keep improving when she received a B+ on one of her weakest subjects. Specifically, high school was difficult. With an eye on their approval, I immersed myself in any activity I could. Along with maintaining a 4.0 GPA, I was the editor of the school newspaper and the debate team captain. Amy breezed through school, barely maintaining a C average and spending much of her time hanging out with friends. I was chosen from our university as one of 2 junior-year applicants to participate in a well-known summer program at Harvard. It was an honor, and I felt wonderful. When I informed my father the news over supper, he grumbled and shifted the conversation to Amy's upcoming dance performance. At least my mother said, "That's nice." But she moved on quickly. My parents were unable to transport me to the airport on the night Amy's concert occurred on the same day I was leaving Harvard because they wanted to see Amy perform. I asked my friends' parents for a ride. Another painful experience was the college admission process. I spent months refining my writings, participating in extracurricular activities, and preparing for the SAT. Several prestigious institutions accepted me, and I was awarded a substantial scholarship to my preferred choice. When I told my parents about this at supper, their reaction was barely acceptable. "That's good, but don't let it run to your head. College isn't everything," my father warned me. "Just remember about us when you're off becoming a big shot," my mother remarked. My parents, on the other hand, were very understanding when Amy barely graduated from high school and decided not to attend college. They appreciated her for knowing herself and challenging conventional norms. They did something they never did for me. They paid for her car as a graduation gift. This repeated favoritism caused me significant emotional distress. Throughout my teens and early 20s, I battled anxiety and sadness. I began therapy in college and realized that my parents' behaviors were not my responsibility. Years of effort were required to improve my self-esteem and learn to validate myself without relying on my parents' approval. Despite the fact that my immediate family did not support me, I was able to live a respectable life. By the time I graduated from college with honors, I had a respectable job in finance and had even acquired my own home by the age of 27. Although my parents aren't, I'm proud of what I've accomplished. Here is where the present drama begins. On my father's side, my grandfather died not long ago. He left a big estate and was a successful entrepreneur who began from scratch. In his will, he divided his property evenly to his grandchildren, including myself, Amy, and our cousins, as well as his children, father, and siblings. My half of the inheritance was substantial, about $500,000. It would have allowed me to invest in my future, pay off my student loans, and possibly even start my own business someday. This unexpected windfall and the opportunities it could provide made me thrilled. When the will was read, my parents visibly became irritated. Later, they got me aside and told me that they thought it was unfair that I received an equal share. Amy, who lives in our parents' basement and works part-time at a coffee shop, said she needed the money more because she was struggling. Even though I was surprised, I tried to remain calm. I stressed that Grandpa made this decision. They had no say in how he did it. They insisted that I act morally and give Amy my due share. They were upset when I declined and started guilt-tripping me, calling me unappreciative and selfish. Every occasion that my father could recall in which they had assisted me was discussed. Though I worked part-time to help with funds, Dad prioritized paying for my medically necessary braces, purchasing the absolute minimum of school supplies, and allowing me to live at home while attending college. He conveniently forgot about the car they purchased Amy, the numerous shopping trips, and the fact that they still support her at the age of 25. The situation became increasingly more serious. My father, as executor of the will, decided to handle everything himself. Along with her own inheritance, he claimed that he would interpret Grandpa's intentions and give Amy my entire share. He said Grandpa would have hoped he knew about our unusual predicament. I was broken. This was not only clearly illegal, but it was also a painful reminder of how little my parents thought of me. I tried to argue with them, pointing out that Grandpa had always treated all of his grandchildren equally and was aware of our situation. My mother then accused me of speaking badly of the deceased by saying that Grandpa would have wanted anything other than what my father advocated. I recalled memories of Grandpa encouraging my academic and career objectives, but my parents dismissed them as misinterpretation. They stated that Grandpa wanted to make sure Amy was taken care of and had quietly expressed concerns about her future. When I inquired why he hadn't simply penned the will that way, they didn't respond. Amy, for her part, felt embarrassed in the situation but did not criticize our parents. When I tried to talk to her alone, she simply shrugged and said, "Mom and Dad know best." She was clearly not going to be much help. I sought advice from Grandpa's widow, my paternal grandmother, as I felt misled and wounded. She grew outraged when she found out what was going on. She informed me that my parents had no right to change the will, and that this was not what Grandpa had intended. Grandma sent some material that clarifies the situation. Several years ago, my parents allegedly urged Grandpa to leave everything to Amy in his will. Grandpa had fiercely resisted, stating that all of his grandchildren should be treated equally. He had even inserted a provision in his will stating that anyone who challenged the equitable distribution would lose their peace. Armed with this knowledge, I questioned my parents. Grandma's revelation of their previous attempt to influence the will astonished them. Saying they were simply concerned with Amy's future helped my father explain it, but I could see the guilt on their faces. Grandmother acted immediately away. She contacted the other executors and lawyers listed in her will. She also contacted my father's siblings, who were similarly outraged by what he was proposing. Together, they put an end to my father's scheme and ensured that the will was carried out as intended. Despite their displeasure with me, my parents had to back down. They stated that I should have addressed this internally rather than involving others and accused me of turning the family against me. My mother wailed over how I had divided the family and deceived them. When my father threatened to cut me completely out of their will, I told him I never expected anything from them. Now, if I accept the request, they threatened to cut off all communication. My father even suggested that if I inherited their house, I would not be welcome there. In a particularly low blow, my mother stated that my acceptance of the money shows that I never genuinely loved them and was only looking to profit from their death. The issue divides the extended family. A handful of my cousins are supportive since they are aware of the long-standing favoritism and appreciate my efforts to advocate for myself. Others feel I should have yielded in order to maintain peace, as family harmony takes precedence over financial concerns. Although my father's siblings are clearly on my side, this has affected their relationship as well as my parents. Amy is caught up in all of this. She revealed in me privately that, while she feels horrible and did not ask for it, she is not ready to confront our parents. She's been educated her entire life to rely on them and seek their approval, so I don't blame her completely. Still, a part of me wishes she could help me just once. This situation has brought back a lot of prior pain and hatred. I find myself recalling all the times I was passed over or disregarded in favor of Amy, the birthday parties I missed, the school functions my parents missed, the accomplishments that went unnoticed. This one incident seemed to be bringing to a close a lifetime of injustice. Despite the fact that the entire event has created a schism in the family, I am standing firm and want to claim my inheritance as Grandpa intended. My parents rarely talk to me, and family gatherings have become awkward. I missed our monthly family supper last week for the first time in as long as I could bear the icy shoulders and accusing glares. Despite the stress, a small part of me feels empowered. For the first time in my life, I am confronting my parents' harsh treatment. I'm declaring my worth and refusing to be written off. It's both dreadful and liberating at once. Though I believe I am in the right, the family turmoil is tiring me. I've been experiencing anxiety episodes again, which I hadn't had since college. To cope with all of this stress, I'm considering returning to therapy. Am I the one who should have refused to meet my parents' expectations and accepted my inheritance? Should I have simply given Amy the money to keep the peace? Although I am tired of being the family scapegoat, I am equally afraid of losing my family completely. Any advice or comment would be greatly appreciated. Update. A lot has transpired since my initial post, which was 6 months ago. I'd want to thank everyone for their encouragement and advice. It helped me stay strong throughout tough times. Let me start with the legal side of things. Many of you cautioned me, and I did consult my own attorney. He confirmed that I had every right to inherit, and that what my father attempted was illegal. He assisted me in recording everything and preparing to take legal action if necessary. Fortunately, things did not turn out as expected. My grandmother, together with my father's brothers, and her lawyers resolved issues outside of court. I received my entire money, and the will was carried out exactly as intended. My father was dismissed from his position as executor due to his attempts to manipulate the will. This was a pretty tough process that lasted several weeks. My parents threatened litigation, and there were stressful meetings and angry phone calls, but the law was clear, and they had to back down. The family rupture, which is still ongoing, is significant. My parents initially remained firm in their stance. They accused me of being avaricious and uncaring of my sister. They also attempted to rally other family members against me, spreading charges that I had pressured Grandpa into giving me money. Fortunately, most of the family saw through their deception. About a month after the will was accepted, there was one particularly terrible incident at a family gathering. My parents caused a disturbance when they arrived unannounced, despite the fact that my aunt was hosting and had not invited them. My father began to yell about how I had stolen from Amy and corrupted Grandma against her. My mother tossed an old photo album straight at my feet, claiming that I had wrecked all these great memories. It was unpleasant and terrible. It took several family members to calm things down and persuade my parents to go. My grandmother, bless her heart, proved to be my most significant supporter throughout this process. She told stories about how my grandfather had always been proud of my accomplishments and how he wanted to ensure that all of his grandchildren had equal opportunities. She even claimed Grandpa kept a scrapbook of my successes, including newspaper clippings of academic distinctions, copies of my college acceptance letters, and even the program from the university play that my parents had been late for. This understanding was both sad and amazing. Grandma also offered to help the rest of the family organize their records. She staged a family meeting that excluded my parents, recounting the full history of my parents' prejudice, even episodes I had long forgotten or had never heard of. Having someone finally realize the injustice I had endured for years was gratifying, but it also revived old wounds. About my sister Amy, she finally found her voice throughout all this. She approached me personally and apologized for not standing up for me before after some soul-searching and several lengthy conversations with our grandmother. She claimed she thought our parents' preference was inappropriate, but she was too afraid to challenge it. We talked about our childhoods and how they inspired each of us in tremendous depth and emotional intensity. Amy stated that being the favorite child was not as enjoyable as it seems. She never learned to stand on her own 2 feet and felt a lot of pressure to meet our parents' expectations. She told us of times when she wanted to do things on her own, but our parents would step in and handle everything for her, depriving her of the opportunity to grow and learn from her mistakes. This conversation marked a significant turning point in our relationship. We began to rebuild the sibling bond that our parents' prejudice had severed. Just the two of us have been meeting for coffee on a regular basis to discuss and encourage each other during this family issue. Everyone was taken aback when she announced that she planned to use her inheritance to pay for education. She claimed that watching me stand up for myself inspired her to start directing her own life. Once she had selected what she wanted to study, she enrolled in a nearby community college with the intention of transferring to a 4-year university. Our parents put out a shocked gasp. I suppose they were aware that their babying had not benefited Amy. My parents' reactions to all of this have been diverse and changing. They initially assaulted both of us angrily. They tried to guilt Amy into dropping out of college to support the family because they said I turned her against them. When their previous plan proved unproductive, they altered it. After numerous lengthy conversations with my grandma and witnessing Amy's remarkable transformation, my mother realized how detrimental their actions had been. She has made some tentative steps toward reconciliation, including starting therapy to address her issues. She contacted us to apologize, admitting that she had been unfair and requested the opportunity to make things right. It's a gradual process, and while I'm cautiously optimistic, I'm also setting firm restrictions. Unfortunately, my father has been less willing to own his mistakes. He is still outraged and feels like the victim in all of this. He has been cool toward Amy since she decided to go to college and hardly speaks to me. He has tried to control us several times, threatening to sell our childhood home if we don't come to our senses or forgiving us if we admit we were wrong. Although we are both standing firm, it hurts to see him alienate both of his children in this manner. The dynamics within the extended family have shifted considerably. I now reside closer to my father's siblings, who have been really helpful, and my grandma. Hearing from my aunts and uncles about how they dealt with my father's hard behavior throughout the years has helped to alleviate my loneliness in this fight. I've also formed stronger ties with several of my cousins who have supported me. Starting a monthly cousin meal helps us to catch up without the drama of the older generations. For myself, I have made good use of my fortune. After paying off my college loans, I now have a great sense of financial freedom. Working with a financial advisor, I developed a diverse investment portfolio. I've also saved some money in case I decide to start my own business in the future. I'm looking into opening a community center that offers competitively cost mental health treatments and financial literacy lectures. However, for me, purchasing therapy for myself and volunteering to do the same for Amy has been the most meaningful use of the funds. We're both learning to set fair boundaries with our parents and attempting to heal from our childhood experiences. Despite the long road ahead, I already feel like I'm growing in my understanding and ability to overcome emotional neglect and long-term prejudice. This entire procedure has brought some unexpected positive changes into my life. I now know a lot about setting boundaries and defending myself. Even though I know I did the right thing, it has not been easy, and there are still difficult days. I feel proud of myself for defying guilt and pressure. Among the more unexpected outcomes has been a shift in my career route. Dealing with all of this family discord and going through treatment has made me realize my own love for helping individuals who, dealing with all of this family turmoil and treatment has shown me how motivated I am to help others who have experienced similar family dynamics. I am currently considering returning to school to specialize in adult offspring of emotionally immature parents and working as a family therapist. I have also been assisting children from difficult family situations at a neighboring youth facility. It is extremely rewarding to be able to provide the encouragement and support that I wished I had received as a child. I'm even thinking of establishing a scholarship fund for youngsters in similar circumstances with some of my inheritance. My contact with Amy has gotten better. We celebrate Siblings Day once a month by doing something fun just the two of us. Our hiking and picnic last month were the most relaxed and connected we'd felt since we were kids. Without our parents' influence, we are gradually rebuilding our relationship on our own terms. Things with my parents continue to be hard. My mother has tried to rebuild our relationship. She has been attending therapy on a regular basis, and she has begun to realize some of the consequences of her bias. We've had a couple one-on-one lunches when we've had some honest, albeit challenging discussions about our history and future plans. Though it is not perfect, there is clearly room for improvement. Nonetheless, my father continues to be resistant to change. He still claims he has done nothing illegal and that Amy and I should be grateful. He refused to be in the same room as me, so he skipped several family occasions. Though it hurts, I'm attempting to let go of my desire to force him to see things differently or control his reactions. Grandma has become a pillar of strength for Amy and me. She has been telling us more stories about our grandfather and how proud he was of us for standing up for ourselves. She has always advocated for justice and understanding, making her an excellent mediator in family disputes. The entire experience has taught me a lot about what it truly means to be family. I've come to realize that sometimes the family you choose is more encouraging than the one you were reared in. Along with forming a close circle of friends who have been extremely supportive throughout this road, I have gotten closer to my aunts, uncles, and cousins who have stood by me. Setting limits and exercising self-care have become increasingly important to me. I'm getting better at saying no to situations that jeopardize my mental health, and I no longer feel awful about putting my personal well-being first. I was so focused with gaining my parents' approval that I had always avoided exploring new interests and activities. To those in the same situation, I would advise you not to let anyone make you feel terrible about collecting what is rightfully yours. Even if it causes disagreement, it is reasonable to defend oneself. Though family dynamics may be complicated, you are entitled to fair treatment. Remember, it is never too late to begin living the life you deserve. Consult a therapist if required. Surround yourself with positive individuals. And don't be afraid to set boundaries. Your value is determined by who you are personally, not how your family treats you. I'd like to thank each of you again for your suggestions and encouragement. It meant more than you could have imagined during a particularly difficult time. Despite the difficulties, I am optimistic about the future and feel a sense of self-assurance that I have not felt in years. I am excited about where this new chapter of my life will take me, and I am determined to break the cycle of favoritism and develop stronger relationships with my own future family members. Ignored at my daughter's wedding, my ex-wife's whispered, "You're just the wallet." Next morning, I woke up with 15 missed calls. I stood there, gripping a watch I'd saved for a year to give her, but the moment she walked down the aisle, it felt like my entire world shattered. What happens when the father gets forgotten at his own daughter's wedding? I didn't arrive to the church early because I was anxious or eager, but rather because I didn't want to ruin the one thing that should have been easy, being on time. I lingered in the parking lot longer than necessary, clutching the little black box containing the watch I had been saving for almost a year to give her. It was a small, pointless present in comparison to the $58,000 I had already spent on this wedding. This one, however, had a backstory. It was a personal one. On the back, it reads, "To Sophia, always your dad." I inhaled deeply before entering, allowing the refreshing blast of the air-conditioned church foyer to remind me that this day was already too formal for someone like me. I was stopped just past the entrance by the wedding planner, a 20-something lady with a clipboard and a fake grin. She tilted her head as if I were an elderly dog she wasn't sure could walk and said, "Hi, you're Lucas, right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the father," a little too firmly. Her smile was smaller this time, like someone cutting deli meat. "You'll be sitting in the back near the center aisle, right? This way." I blinked. I thought I would be seated close to the front. With that same brittle civility, she shook her head. "Sophia's mom said you'd prefer it this way." I simply walked without saying anything. As we passed polished pews occupied by strangers, my footsteps were too loud on the tile floor. I assumed they were Doug's friends. Extended family on his side. A few individuals gave me confused, pitying looks, as if they had been told I was a problem that had been solved. Like I was scared the wood would splinter, I climbed up from the back, slid into my seat, and sat down gingerly. My chest felt hollow, as if I had swallowed something too large to pass, and my palms were already wet before the ceremony had even begun. Then my daughter Sophia, wearing a long veil, a white dress and a smile so big it nearly hurt to look at her, entered. Next to her, wearing a dapper navy suit and matching boutonniere, came her stepfather, Doug, who walked tall and proud. I sat there, forgotten, a man with a small black box, watching a memory being rebuilt in real time while the audience turned to watch them, phones up, flashbulbs popping. Not even the music was audible to me. A sort of white cacophony flooded my ears, the kind that only occurs when grief masquerades as rage. I wanted to laugh, yell, or toss the darn watch like a grenade across the aisle. Rather, I merely observed. My ex-wife, Karen, leaned over at that moment. Pearl earrings, a flawless blonde haircut, and that smile she had just before giving someone a flattering compliment. "You're just the checkbook, not the dad. Don't make this about you," she said, leaning in to whisper. She then leaned back as if she had just given me a 25-year receipt. The accuracy with which she delivered the death shot, no drama, no scene, was almost astounding. The man who stayed out of the way and signed the checks only heard a whisper in his ear. I clenched my fingers around the package. Now the watch inside felt heavier, as though it were soaking up all the embarrassment I was attempting to hide. "I do," Doug said proudly and clearly when the preacher asked, "Who gives this woman?" And I simply sat there, not breathing or making any noise. For what on earth was I meant to say? I paid for the goddamn flowers? Sophia was the only one who didn't turn to face me. She didn't smile at me as she went by or look for me in the crowd. The fact that she didn't even feel bad about it might have been the worst part. She appeared content. A chilly switch flicked inside of me somewhere beneath the heartache and humiliation. I no longer felt like a dad. I gave up on attempting to participate in a day that I was obviously never invited to in the first place. They left me out of the story, but they failed to remember that the author still has the final say. As I sat there grinning in my expensive suit, I watched my daughter leave me with her new father at her side. I did not give a clap. I refrained from crying. I took no action. But by no means was I finished. When you drive a child to school for an extended period of time, especially when the sun is just rising and the world hasn't quite recalled how loud it's meant to be yet, something occurs. Like an unseen thread woven through each shared silence and incomplete sentence, this calm, nuanced understanding develops between you. Those early morning drives, when neither of us really spoke much yet somehow managed to say everything that mattered, are what I remember most about Sophia when she was 8 years old. It was the year following Karen's departure. She didn't object, so I was granted sole custody. Before she took her luggage out, I believe she was nearly halfway through. I won't claim to have been a flawless father. I once sent my daughter to school wearing mismatched shoes because I believed the lights in her room were broken, burned more dinners than I cooked correctly, and neglected to sign a few permission slips. She had only been concealing her laundry, however. Rain, shine, or the kind of tiredness that leaves your bones feeling hollow, I still turned up every single day. I was present. From the age of 6 to 11, I recall taking Sophia to her soccer trials for 5 consecutive summers. She played for a total of just 3 seasons, which is funny. I suppose I was trying too hard even then, constantly showing up when no one asked me to, cheering loudly from the sidelines even when the score was already 10-0. I continued to believe that hard work would win loyalty, if not love. I didn't know that back then, but it turns out that's not how the arithmetic works. I believed that we were actually constructing something. The fragrance of peanut butter permeated the entire home. She enjoyed that for lunch, and I never really figured out how to make anything good other than that. Sometimes I would attempt to make it more interesting, like cutting the sandwich into stars or slipping in a sticky note with a stupid joke, but all she would do was roll her eyes and chuckle like a child who can't express how much they love something. Afterward, there were science assignments, Halloween costumes, and late evenings before math exams when we would sit at the kitchen table and pretend that I knew how to calculate fractions. I will always remember the day she brought her first boyfriend home. She came in holding hands with this gangly youngster wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big while I was in the garage fixing something that didn't need to be fixed just to keep busy. She said, "This is Kyle." And he appeared to want to burrow into the plasterboard. I didn't make a scene or say anything smart. She chuckled and simply nodded, saying, "You treat her right, or I'll make you cry." Kyle didn't. Those are still my words. At first, though, things altered gradually. A missed call here, a brief embrace there. Around that time, Karen got married again. Doug was a walking advertisement. He was pleasant, successful, and yet always tan. He was funny, owned a boat, and didn't smell like engine oil like I always did. I found it to be good at first. Instead of a distant mother and one workaholic screw-up, she might finally have 2 positive father models. However, it didn't take me long to notice that she spoke his name more than mine, that the holidays had become more complicated, and that I had been invited to lunch on Christmas Eve rather than Christmas morning. This summer was the major change. She became 16. She didn't look me in the eye and hardly touched her food over that entire week. Then one evening, she simply blurted it out in the driveway as I was about to drop her off at her part-time work at the bookstore. "Doug's just easier to talk to, Dad," she remarked. "I should be proud that she found someone else who got her," she continued, as if it were a praise. Hearing it from the girl whose night terrors I used to calm with lullabies I hardly remembered broke something I didn't realize could still break, even if maybe I should have. I remained silent in response. Simply nodded, shifted into drive, and took her to work. We didn't fully communicate. She put a tune I didn't recognize on the low setting of the radio. "Love you," she said as she got out of the car, but it seemed more like a habit than an emotion. Then things worsened. She seemed to be attempting to weaken our bond until it could safely fade away without incident, as evidenced by the unanswered calls and the shorter, more dispersed visits. And because I didn't want to push, I let it happen. I didn't want to be the controlling father who pushed love where it wasn't wanted. All I could think about, however, as I sat in my car in the parking lot outside her wedding reception, were the 17 years I had spent establishing a relationship that she seemed so keen to end. 17 years, 3 days a week, every other weekend, reduced to a single seat in the back and a whisper that told me I didn't count. I hadn't left yet though. I was still waiting in that lot with the little black package still in my lap, unopened. I'm not sure why, but I felt a tug that I hadn't experienced in years, something sharp, angry, and old. Forgotten fathers, we remember everything, and love like that doesn't die easily. I'm not sure what my decision to stay says about me. Perhaps I was waiting for someone to realize that I was still here. Perhaps I was looking for a clue, any clue that this wasn't actually happening as it appeared. Perhaps all I wanted to do was watch how far they would go before someone blinked. As a result, I watched the ceremony with blurred vision, not totally confident that he wasn't already a ghost, much like a man seeing his own burial in a dream. I slid out with the other silent, forgotten guests and headed to the country club where the reception was being held after they exchanged vows, kissed for the cameras, and walked back down the aisle with her hand in Doug's and her grin gleaming. A palace served as the receiving area. Real columns, marble floors, and champagne glasses so tiny they felt like holding a breath are all examples of this, and it's not a metaphor either. The people were laughing as if nothing in the world had ever disappointed them, and they were dressed in clothes that cost more than I made in a month. I entered, gave no one a specific nod, and made my way directly to the bar. I nearly burst out laughing when the bartender asked whether I wanted an open tab. Saying, "It's my daughter's wedding." He didn't understand the joke, poured me a bourbon, and went on to the next man in line, who appeared to fit in better. I already paid for everything in this damn room. I located a table close to the corner, close enough to conceal myself but not quite in the shadows. I saw Sophia and Doug dance for their father-daughter waltz. That was so ironic that I almost dropped the glass out of my hand. I couldn't decide whether to flip the table, laugh, or cry. Bourbon was my choice. After 3 drinks, I began to feel brave, or perhaps simply numb. It never even came out of the box, I thought as I continued to brush my thumb over the engraved watch in my pocket. "Don't be late to your own wedding, kid," was the little joke I had planned to tell her during our dance, but it never worked out because the time never arrived. Then, as if I were an old college friend he hadn't seen in a long time, rather than the man whose shoes he was filling without authorization, Doug came up and grinned as if nothing had happened. He said, "Hey, Lucas," and held out a hand. I glanced at his hand but didn't shake it. Instead, I gave him a quick, firm nod, as if to keep my brain from blowing up. "Thanks again for helping make today happen. Means a lot to Sophia." "Sure," I replied, delighted to be able to finance the fantasy. He chuckled as if I were kidding. I wasn't. The DJ declared that the toast will start a few minutes later. Her college friend, a decently pleasant girl with little to say, was the maid of honor initially. Then came Doug's younger brother, the best man, who appeared to have rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror but still managed to fumble it. Hugs, cheek kisses, clinks of glasses, and laughter. The entire thing had the appearance of a fucking brochure. However, nobody called my name. The bride's father was not asked whether he had anything to say. I got to my feet at that point. I didn't wait for the song to end or ask for permission. I went directly over to the microphone, grabbed it as if it were mine, and cleared my throat. As if someone had put the emergency brake on the whole party, the conversation abruptly stopped. I noticed Sophia's mouth opening slightly and her eyes widening. Karen's expression froze. Doug did not move, but he leaned forward in his chair. Astute? I simply started talking without shouting or raising my voice. When Sophia was 5, she asked me why the sky was blue. I didn't know the answer, not exactly. I said something about air, water, and sunlight. She nodded like she understood, but then asked me if the sky would ever change its mind, if it could decide to be red or green or something completely different. People began to laugh politely and perplexedly, but that was her way of asking questions I didn't know how to respond to, such as why her mother stopped attending soccer matches, why I occasionally appeared exhausted all the time, or why Doug owned a yacht while I just owned a rusted automobile. Faces fell. The air tightened and changed. From skinned knees and tree forts to heartbreaks and high school dances, I witnessed this girl's development. The night she fractured her arm, I stood in the rain with a flat tire and wouldn't leave the emergency room until she was asleep. I taught her how to balance a checkbook, how to parallel park, and how to be proud of doing the difficult things, even when no one else is looking. I looked around the room. The majority of people had stopped eating. A few had set down their glasses. I never sought anything in return, and I never asked for applause. I assumed that love would suffice. I did, however, sit in the rear row today. No pictures with the bride. Don't dance, no words. Only a bill. Sophia's mouth quivered. Karen refused to look at me. Doug had not yet moved. I suppose I'll just be the bank that trusted her silence if I'm not the father. There was only the sound of forks scratching plates and someone clearing their throat close to the bar, no applause or cheers. Gently putting the microphone down again, I made my way back through the crowd as if it were a fog that was unable to separate. I didn't take the watch out of my pocket or say farewell. The silence was louder than any speech I could have prepared beforehand as I left the event and into the chilly night air. My phone sounded like a siren the following morning, 17 voice notes, all from Sophia. Some were upset, some were crying. Just a single sniffle of quiet. The final request. Please talk to me, Dad. Please. I didn't know. Please. I didn't hit play again, though, not quite yet. The phone was vibrating every few seconds as another voice message from Sophia arrived in my inbox with a gentle ping that somehow managed to sound more like remorse than a notice. It rested on the kitchen counter as if it had been waiting for this moment its entire existence. I sat down in the same wooden chair where I had taught her how to weave friendship bracelets when she was 10 years old and devastated because her best friend had stopped sitting with her at lunch. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee, the kind that had been in the pot for too long. In some way, the chair felt smaller now, as if the wood under me had been squashed by grief, or perhaps I was simply carrying more weight than usual, the type that doesn't show up in mirrors, the kind that doesn't go away with time or exercise. She began the first message by sobbing, not the type of polite sniffles you hear in movies, but actual, unfiltered sobs and nasty gasps that came from the place deep inside her chest, Where the body stores all the things she doesn't want to say. Dad, she began. Please don't ignore me. Please, I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't know they put you in the back. With my shoulders down and my arms crossed, I listened without touching the screen, trying not to react because there wasn't much more to say. What kind of apology could heal a hurt that had been neglected for years? A few minutes later, a second, more irate message arrived. You ruined my wedding. Do you even realize that? Everyone was whispering about your little speech. I can't believe you would do that to me. As I looked at the floor, I pondered how easily individuals might go from sadness to guilt when they eventually face the truth of a broken mirror. I simply took another drink of bitter coffee and waited for the next one without saying anything into the air. The third message was brief and said, "You embarrassed Mom." Like her mother hadn't spent the greater part of 10 years telling her that I was simply a bearded walking bank account, there was no emotion or justification, just a straight strike to the chest. The fourth followed shortly after. Doug said you told him you didn't want to be involved, that you were too busy with work to care about the planning, that you didn't even RSVP until the last minute. Why would you lie like that? When she said the word lie, her voice broke, and I felt my fingers clench into a fist on the side of my thigh for the first time that morning. The RSVP had not escaped my notice. On the same day that I received it, I returned it. Hell, I had already seen the font choices and paid for the printing of the fucking invitations. However, it was now beginning to fit together like puzzle pieces that I was unaware were on the table. She had been fed stories by Doug, small, casual things that were likely spoken over breakfast or in the vehicle, never loud enough to set off alarms but just subtle enough to make her wonder who I was. I shrugged when she asked why I hadn't called after her college exams, and I smirked when I didn't attend a brunch to which I wasn't invited. Short tales. Minor omissions. Until I was outside my own daughter's life, peering in through stained glass, each of them put a brick between us. Her tone had changed once more by the seventh message. I remember when I broke my wrist and you stayed up all night with me. I remember how you used to put my stuffed animals in a circle around me when I was sick so I wouldn't feel alone. I don't know why I stopped remembering those things. I let that one hit where it needed to by closing my eyes. Message 10 was more subdued and worn out. Doug told me you sold your old truck because it didn't make sense to keep something so sentimental. I always wondered why you never drove it again. I thought you didn't care, but now I'm wondering who told me that. Against the chair's edge, my knuckles were white. The truck was more than simply a car. I never sold it since it was the final gift my father gave me before he died. Since it would no longer pass inspection, I had put it in a storage facility outside of town, but I couldn't bear to part with it. And because Doug had stated so, she now believed that I had thrown it away as if it were nothing. Her voice was low and her breathing was shallow, as if she didn't want anybody else to hear her in the 15th message. I think he's been lying to me. I don't know what to think. I sat in that chair as if it were made of concrete without moving. The 17th followed. Dad, Doug told me you didn't even want to be there. He told me you said it wasn't worth the time, that you didn't want to stand up in front of everyone because it would ruin the flow of the ceremony, and I believed him. I believed all of it. I don't know why, but I did. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That one broke me, not because it was painful, though it was, but because I had allowed it to happen. I had taken a back seat, attempting to be the bigger guy, the more reserved man, the amiable one who didn't want to cause arguments or stir up trouble. I also allowed someone else to write my portion of the story by doing that. I was unaware that we were on the board, and Doug had been playing the long game. I got out of the chair, went to the drawer that contained the items I didn't want to look at, such as closed accounts, divorce documents, and old pictures with wrinkles from the heat, and took out the card from my attorney. Marcus Hayes was his name, and he had always told me, if you ever change your mind, you have options. I did that morning. I called because I finally realized what they had attempted to take from me and I wasn't going to give them the last say, not because I wanted retribution. I left the folder in the top drawer of the filing cabinet, under a pile of old tax returns and a washing machine manual that I hadn't used in more than 10 years. Slowly, as if it were something brittle or cursed, I took it out and placed it open on the kitchen table beside a half-full mug of reheated coffee that had once again become lukewarm. Everything was there, notarized, time-stamped, and itemized. Even the down payment receipts for the bespoke lighting and the $1,000 cake that nobody remembered to serve, as well as the catering contract, venue rental agreement, and floral design invoice. Not Doug's, not Karen's, not Sophia's, but mine, my name on every line, my signature in every box, my bank account on every transaction. As the venue planner went over package possibilities and added zero after zero to the price, I recalled sitting in her office and nodding along. I pretended not to flinch because I knew Sophia deserved the best. I continued to think, perhaps naively, that providing it would be more important than the politics of motherhood after a divorce. I recalled the hefty, glossy folder she had given me, which had the words, "Primary Client," printed in block letters on the front. That's when I laughed. "Guess that makes me the boss," I quipped. The woman also chuckled. Neither of us said out loud that I would never be treated that way by anyone. Nevertheless, I sat in my chair at that old kitchen table and read every sentence as if it were scripture weeks after the wedding and days after those 17 phone messages played like a slideshow of remorse. But then I noticed it, underlined in yellow from a meeting months prior. All footage and creative assets are the property of the primary payer, unless otherwise stated in a separate media release. The rest of the text was conventional fare, including liability protections, damage waivers, and non-refundable deposits. Like a freight train in reverse, it struck me. I owned the footage, the pictures, the uncut takes, the soundtrack, and the edit, but not the wedding, the day or the instant she said "I do" and forgot I was there. There was nothing I wanted to cancel. I didn't want to be the type of man who burns the ground to feel good about himself because the wedding has already taken place. However, I desired something genuine, something enduring, something that, for once, featured me in the picture, not merely as a name on a receipt or a blur in the background, but as a complete, indisputable and irrevocable presence. Consequently, I called the photographer and the videographer twice. "I'm the man who paid your bill," was how both talks began, and that was all they needed to hear. I only asked for one thing, a different cut of the wedding video, my cut, without shouting or making demands. There were no wide pans that covered my face while Doug played the hero, no images of me sitting by myself in the back, and no edits that gave the impression that I was an outsider in a family-filled room. I requested that they use the money I had paid for to produce something truthful, sincere, and silent. I recorded my toast and forwarded it to them. With clenched teeth and a broken heart, I said, "So, if I'm not the father, I guess I'll just be the bank that believed in her." And I asked that the movie conclude with it fading to black on that line. 3 weeks later, they sent the edited version on a flash drive, enclosed in a protective envelope. I once sat by myself in the living room, with the lights out and the volume turned down, and watched it. My face, my words, my presence, and the lengthy silent pause that followed the last statement like an unanswered question were all real. It wasn't dramatic or resentful. I took a while to send it. Uncertain whether I was trying to punish her or set myself free, I kept it on my desk for nearly a week before mailing it, just the flash drive and a printed photo I discovered hidden in the back of a drawer, without a letter or return address. Sophia and I were laughing like the world had never wronged us in the front yard, both of us smeared with mud. With my hair not yet gray and her front teeth still crooked, she must have been 8 or 9 years old. I assumed she would understand me without my having to say anything if she ever opened the present. I remained silent after that. Didn't answer her calls or the fresh wave of messages that arrived, some of which were angry, some of which were hopeful, and one of which was just her sobbing quietly into the phone while repeating, "I didn't know, I didn't know." As if it were a curse or a hymn. I stopped responding because I did too much to continue attempting to wring love out of a relationship that had been reduced to a cameo, not because I no longer loved her. I had no intention of punishing her. I simply didn't want to try out for the part of father in a life that I had already paid a high price to be a part of. Silence is sometimes a disguised form of mercy, despite the common belief that it is cruel. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to remain silent. I kept what I did a secret from everyone, even the lawyer, Karen, and Doug. Sophia is most likely the only one who was aware of it, and only if she viewed the entire movie. Bridges weren't burned by me. I refrained from punching. I simply gave them the bill and turned to go. And perhaps that's the problem with forgetting. You gain the ability to remember everything, not to use it as a weapon, but to recognize the aspects of yourself that cannot be bought, altered or replaced. I simply nod and respond, "Yeah, I was there." Because I was there when others asked me about the wedding, including if I went, danced, or cried. Long before there was a cake, music, dress or guest list, I was there. I was present when she first handled a crayon and sketched a picture of us both grinning under a crooked sun on a hill. She only wanted to know if it would ever alter its mind when I was there and the sky was blue. Even after years have passed, I still don't know the answer, but I do know this. If love without acknowledgement is still considered love, then perhaps some of us lead our daughters down the aisle without ever stepping into the spotlight. Entitled parents gave my brother $50 million while I have a dust gallery. Then I found the secret vault, and they stopped laughing. They laughed when I got the gallery instead of the fortune. Then the FBI showed up, and my brother was the one in handcuffs. While my brother received $50 million, my parents left me their failing art gallery. "Enjoy the dust," he said with a giggle. Then I discovered the secret vault of my grandfather. And something that caused my brother to faint was within. Long shadows were created throughout the deserted exhibition area as the last of the sunshine streamed through Mason Gallery's dusty windows. I stood there attempting to take in the events of the previous day while inhaling the familiar smell of old wood and oil paint. Janice Mason is my name, and yesterday I received what my family regarded as their worst letdown. Boston's downtown art gallery is in decline. My memory of the lawyer's office was still clear. The grandfather clock, the massive mahogany desk, and the smugly pricey fragrance of my brother Marcus filled the room. Marcus couldn't suppress his joy as Mr. Harrington read out the contents of our parents' will, which should have been a solemn event. To our son, Marcus Mason, we leave the sum of $50 million, our Hampton estate, and controlling interest in Mason Industries. Mr. Harrington had spoken in a cold, professional tone. To our daughter, Janice, we leave Mason Gallery and its contents. In fact, Marcus had burst out laughing. Finally. Dad always said you get exactly what you deserved, Janice. His Italian leather shoes, his well-tailored suit, and the way he sat in his chair as if he owned the space are all still in my memory. Now, in many respects, he did. The gallery's been losing money for years, he added, looking at his neatly striped nails. But hey, at least you'll have plenty of dust to keep you company. Maybe you can sell pencil sketches to tourists. It turns out that Marcus was correct about the gallery's financial status. For the previous 10 years, Mason Gallery had been having difficulties. Once Boston's leading platform for up-and-coming artists, it has steadily deteriorated into a barely profitable business that most serious collectors ignored. However, Marcus didn't comprehend, and neither did my parents, that I had always noticed something here that they didn't notice. I spent many hours with my grandfather, Gerald Mason, the gallery's founder, growing up in these hallways. Grandpa Gerald educated me about painting as my mother planned Marcus's route to an MBA and my dad was busy preparing him for the family company. True art. The essence of each artwork, not just the price tags and financial potential that my parents were obsessed with. He would say, "Janice, my dear," with his eyes sparkling beneath wire-rimmed glasses. "Remember that true value isn't always visible at first glance. Sometimes the greatest treasures hide in plain sight, waiting for the right person to discover them." I could still hear those remarks as I passed through the main hall of the gallery. Even in its current state, the room was stunning, with high ceilings, traditional crown molding, and large windows that could let in an abundance of natural light when they were clean. However, years of little care had taken their toll. Half of the track lighting had burned out, the walls shouted out for new paint, and the hardwood flooring needed to be refinished. My footsteps reverberated in the quiet as I arrived at the rear office. Although my parents finally turned it into a sterile storage area, this had formerly been my grandfather's haven. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and everything was covered in dust. However, I could still sense Grandpa Gerald's presence beneath everything. I recalled the stories he used to tell me about the gallery's early years as I ran my fingertips along his old desk, which is now tucked away in a corner and covered in boxes. How, in the 1960s, he transformed it from nothing into a sanctuary for artists who would go on to become legendary. Rumor had it that throughout the years, he had accumulated an amazing private collection. However, nothing noteworthy was ever discovered after his death 15 years ago. Of course, my folks had looked. Persuaded that Grandpa Gerald had stashed away masterpieces worth millions of dollars, they spent months looking through the gallery. They came in appraisers, employed specialists, and even had the walls inspected for secret passageways. They only discovered the gallery's standard stock, which had respectable pieces but nothing noteworthy. They eventually gave up. Due to some residual sense of duty to Grandpa Gerald's memory, the gallery was abandoned and eventually turned into a tax write-off. Instead, they concentrated on Mason Industries, preparing Marcus to carry on the real family tradition. While I worked as a curator at lesser museums and pursued my studies in art history, I shivered as a sharp draft brought me back to the here and now. While I was absorbed in my memories, night had fallen, and the gallery had a new feel in the shadows. The few paintings that were still on show appeared to be watching me with sly eyes, and the shapes of the sculptures cast odd shadows on the walls. I was going to head out when I noticed something. I had never before noticed a small unevenness in the floors close to Grandpa Gerald's desk. I knelt down and rubbed the wood with my hands. There was undoubtedly a problem with the pattern. A slight abnormality that didn't seem to be the effect of age but rather deliberate. As I recalled another of Grandpa Gerald's favorite sayings, my heart began to race. The best hiding place is one that looks like it's trying to hide something else. Over the course of the following hour, I thoroughly examined that floor and its surroundings. I was about to give up until my fingers discovered it. A small lever in the wood, disguised as a knot. I pulled it with shaky hands. The mechanism hardly produced a sound because it was so well built. A thin gap appeared beneath the floorboard as a small piece moved aside. A leather-bound diary with yellowed pages was inside, and one key, which appeared to be far older than the gallery itself. It was my grandfather's journal. I instantly recognized his unique handwriting. These notes, however, were hasty, almost frenzied, full of calculations, doodles, and what appeared to be coded signals. They were not written in his typical flowing style. I looked at one page. It said, "The True Collection. For Janice's eyes only," at the top in bold letters. I turned the page with trembling hands. However, my phone buzzed before I could continue reading. Marcus had texted me. "Meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., time to discuss selling that dusty gallery of yours. I already have buyers interested in the building." I glanced at the letter and then back at the journal I was holding. What I just discovered was unknown to Marcus. And I intended to maintain it just that way for the time being. I made sure the floor panel was firmly closed before gently putting the journal and key back where they belonged. I felt different as I left the gallery that evening. I had changed the weight of my ostensibly useless inheritance into expectation. I was left more than a struggling gallery by my grandfather. He left me in the dark. And I would start revealing what Grandpa Gerald had kept concealed all those years ago tomorrow, while Marcus planned to strip this home for parts. The key felt more important in my fingers than ever when I secured the front entrance of the gallery. I grinned as I gazed up at the building's graceful exterior, recalling Grandpa Gerald's final words. "Patience, Janice. The best stories take time to unfold." He was correct. This was only the start. The following morning, I got to the gallery well in advance of my 9 a.m. getting together with Marcus. I hardly noticed the deserted halls being tinted in tones of gold by the morning. All I could think about was the secret compartment and what was inside. I knelt down next to Grandpa Gerald's old desk and pressed the hidden mechanism once more. Now the key and diary felt heavy with potential. I located a peaceful spot and started reading. "My dearest Janice," said the opening page. "If you're reading this, you've already proven you have the patience and perception I always saw in you. What I'm about to share must remain our secret. The true legacy of Mason Gallery isn't in its walls, but below them." As I turned the pages, my heart was pounding. The notebook told a remarkable tale that lasted for decades. In addition to running a gallery, Grandpa Gerald had been a member of a group of art preservationists who fought to keep masterpieces safe during difficult times. It seems that the gallery's basement was used for purposes other than storage. A sophisticated network of secret rooms beneath the main floor was depicted in a number of intricate drawings. The diary said that Grandpa Gerald had been covertly altering the building's original foundation for years in order to create a climate-controlled vault that nobody else was aware of. "The key," he said, "opens more than just a door. It opens a legacy I've spent my life building. But be careful, Janice. Others have searched for this collection, and not all of them have honest intentions." I jumped as I heard a harsh knock at the front door. Marcus was standing outside looking impatient. I hastily tucked the journal away and gathered my thoughts before opening the door for him. "Well, if it isn't the curator of dust," he said with a sly smile, walking right by me. "I brought some potential buyers. They're interested in turning this place into luxury condos." Two men in pricey suits stood behind him. They appeared to be developers. They treated the gallery's past like a nuisance that needed to be destroyed and started talking about load-bearing walls and square footage right away. One of them, looking at his tablet, remarked, "The basement would make excellent parking space. According to the original plans, it's mostly unused." I was cold. Should they begin excavating there? "The gallery isn't for sale," I stated. Marcus's expression grew serious. "Don't be ridiculous, Janice. This place is worthless as an art gallery. You can barely pay the utilities." I said no. Marcus lowered his voice and took a step closer. "I know you had some sentimental attachment to Grandpa's little hobby, but it's time to grow up. Take the money and walk away." I slowly looked into his eyes. "Like you did? Taking millions while contributing nothing?" His face reddened. "I earned my inheritance by learning the business, not wasting time listening to an old man's fairy tales about art. Get out." I spoke quietly yet firmly. "All of you," Marcus cautioned, "you're making a mistake," as I led them to the exit. "I'm trying to help you. I don't need your kind of help." My heart thumping, I leaned against the wall after they had gone. Marcus was a man who never gave up easily. "I have to get things done quickly." I went back to the diary and carefully examined the basement blueprints. According to Grandpa Gerald's notes, the vault's entrance was concealed in the northwest corner of the basement behind a fake wall. If the key was used properly, it would trigger a mechanism. I inhaled deeply before descending the stairs to the basement. It was just as I remembered, rows of metal shelves with decades worth of paperwork, old show materials, and wrapped artworks and sculptures. I saw it differently today, though. I headed for the northwest corner as directed by the logbook. The bare concrete walls met at a straight angle, and it appeared solid at first glance. However, I noticed faint abnormalities in the pattern when I rubbed my fingertips across the surface. What looked like a tiny fracture in the concrete was precisely where the key fit. I turned it with trembling hands in the order recorded in the journal. 1/4 to the left, 3/4 to the right, and then back to the right. Nothing happened for a second. Then I heard it. A faint click, then the murmur of machinery that was hidden. Silently, the artificial wall swung in, exposing a steel door with an advanced electronic keypad. I was also ready for this thanks to the journal. The code was created in a particular manner and was predicated on a crucial date, the day Grandpa Gerald inaugurated the gallery. I meticulously typed the numbers. 1965,412. Climate-controlled air swept over me as the door opened with a soft hiss. I was astounded by the scene that was illuminated by motion-activated lights that flickered on. The vault was enormous, much bigger than it ought to have been. The walls were lined with rows of meticulously conserved paintings, each housed in a specially made cabinet. On pedestals, sculptures were displayed, their shapes creating elaborate shadows. Smaller items, including rare manuscripts, antiquated antiques, and things I knew from my art history coursework but had never anticipated seeing in reality, were displayed in display cases. A plain desk with a letter positioned exactly in the center stood in the midst of the room. My hands trembled as I opened it. Janice, my darling, in the True Mason Gallery, you will find complete documentation for every item in the vault, including its provenance, history, and most importantly, its rightful owners. Some of these pieces were entrusted to me for safekeeping during difficult times, while others were saved from those who would have destroyed them for political or financial gain. What you see around you is the result of a lifetime of work, not just mine, but the efforts of countless others who believed in preserving beauty and history. This collection exists to be safeguarded until the appropriate moment for each piece to return home, not to be sold or showcased for prestige. Because you recognize that art is about sustaining the thread of human creativity that unites us all, rather than about status or price tags, I have selected you for this responsibility. There's a smaller room at the back of the vault, and that collection is different, items I've lawfully acquired over the years, meticulously verified and documented, and those are yours to do with as you please. They should supply more than enough funds to keep the gallery and the vault operating as intended. Be cautious, be patient, and most importantly, be loyal to the role you have been given. With all of my affection, Gerald, Grandpa. I looked at everything in the vault in awe for hours. Works by masters I had only read about, pieces believed to be lost to time, and others whose existence had only been reported made up the astounding collection. I discovered hundreds of carefully chosen pieces by painters whose values had risen dramatically over the years in the private collection Grandpa Gerald had indicated. They are valued at much over $100 million, even by modest estimates. However, it wasn't the cash that made me cry. It was the faith my grandfather had put in me, the legacy he had, without my knowledge, set for me all those years before. The magic was broken by a notification on my phone. Marcus left several missed calls and sent a text message. "This isn't over. You're making a huge mistake." I grinned as I surveyed the vault's precious collection, which my brother would have sold without hesitation. I was absolutely sure of my direction for the first time since I inherited the gallery. I made my way back upstairs and carefully secured the vault. Work needed to be done. The gallery required remodeling. It was time to upgrade security. I also had a legacy to uphold. One thing Marcus was correct about was that this was far from over. However, he was unaware of what he was actually up against. I was suddenly the custodian of something far more valuable than money could buy, while he planned to take what he believed to be a building of little value. I said as I peered up at the gallery's walls, "Thank you, Grandpa Gerald. I won't let you down." The weeks that followed were filled with a lot of activity. I had contractors sign strict confidentiality agreements before I could hire them to restore the gallery's original characteristics. To keep curious onlookers away, the basement was marked as undergoing environmental assessment and remained completely off-limits. I read through Grandpa Gerald's journal at night to discover the backstories of every item in the vault. Some had been saved from more recent wars, while others had been saved from Nazi theft during World War II. Every piece of art had a comprehensive file with information on its original owners and the events leading up to my grandfather's possession. Marcus, However, kept his word and wasn't giving up. The legal threats came first. His attorneys sent him a hefty letter demanding an immediate sale, arguing that the gallery's declining state amounted to careless handling of family property. I gave it to my own lawyer, an expert in art law, whom I had discreetly hired with money from the sale of a single small item from my grandfather's private collection. Then came the strain of money. Marcus interfered with the gallery's utility supplies, insurance, and even the property tax assessment by using his contacts. Every time, I used resources he was unaware I possessed to oppose his movements. The pivotal moment occurred on a soggy Tuesday morning. When I got to the gallery, Marcus and two unfamiliar men were waiting. "These gentlemen are from the Boston Historical Society," he replied. He had a razor-sharp smile. "They're very interested in examining the building's original foundation. Apparently, there are concerns about structural integrity." The way they handled themselves and the tiny bulges under their coats made it clear to me right away that they were not from any historical society. They were, at worst, private detectives. I firmly stated, "The gallery is closed for renovations. Any inspections need to be scheduled through proper channels." Among the men, one moved forward. "We have authorization to leave," I interrupted him. "Or I'll call the actual authorities." Marcus stayed after they had gone. "What are you hiding, Janice? There's something in this building worth protecting, isn't there? Something Grandpa Gerald left behind?" "The only thing I'm protecting is this gallery's future," I responded. "Why can't you accept that?" His face grew serious. "Because I know you. You were always his favorite, always listening to his stories. He must have told you something. Let me give you some clues." "The clue is in plain sight, Marcus. You just never cared enough to look." I realized that evening that I needed to expedite my plans. Marcus was becoming desperate, and individuals who are desperate tend to make bad decisions. I meticulously documented everything in the vault for hours on end. Then I called 3 people, the world's foremost authority on art repatriation, a contact at Interpol, and an old friend at the FBI's Art Crime Division. Marcus took action 2 days later. When I heard the basement door open, I was working late. 3 dark-clad males were seen on security cameras heading downstairs. I knew exactly who had sent them, even though Marcus wasn't with them. I calmly pressed the quiet alarm, which was a customized one I'd built that was directly connected to police enforcement, rather than the gallery's standard system. After that, I headed to the basement. The workers were already at the northwest corner, using specialized tools to examine the wall. When I walked in, they hardly gave me a look. I said, "Looking for something?" One snarled, "Lady, just walk away. This doesn't concern you." "Actually," I said with a grin, "it concerns me very much. So do the federal agents who just surrounded the building." Voices burst from above as if on cue. "FBI, this is a federal art crimes investigation. Everyone remains where you are?" What happened next was a haze of activity. The would-be robbers were taken into custody. Marcus was taken up at his house after being located via their phones. Everything was exposed by the search warrants, including his ambitions for the gallery, his hired goons, and even his ties to certain dishonest collectors who dealt in stolen art. The following morning, however, was the true surprise. At the gallery, I had scheduled a special meeting. Officials from several governments were present, as were representatives from museums and cultural organizations worldwide. We went down into the vault together. As the collection was unveiled by the lights, their gasps reverberated off the walls. As long-lost masterpieces were rediscovered, tears were shed. When artifacts that were believed to be destroyed were discovered to be completely preserved, museum directors embraced one another. I gave Grandpa Gerald access to everything, including his meticulous paperwork, documents, and the backstories of how each item had ended up in his custody. We would collaborate over the course of the following year to restore each piece of art to its proper location, bringing the gallery recognition on a global scale for what it gave back rather than what it owned. Marcus, who had lost his freedom and reputation due to his own selfishness, watched it all happen from behind bars. He would have plenty of time to consider his options because the evidence discovered in his house had linked him to other art trafficking enterprises. Regarding the gallery itself, I created a foundation devoted to safeguarding and conserving art in times of war by using a portion of Grandpa Gerald's own collection. The gallery evolved into a hub for activism and education, educating the next generation on the value of cultural heritage. I was standing in the newly remodeled main hall exactly 1 year after I had found the vault. The original architectural details had been brought back to their former splendor, and the room was flooded with light. As Grandpa Gerald had done when he originally founded the gallery, a special exhibition was about to begin, but it would feature works by up-and-coming local artists rather than priceless masterpieces. I have 2 items on my desk in my office, which used to be Grandpa Gerald's haven. His journal, which serves as a reminder of the heritage he left me, is the first. The second is a brief news article from the day Marcus was convicted, which serves as a reminder that genuine value lies in what you choose to preserve rather than what you can take. The Mason name is still used by the gallery, but it now represents something else. A dedication to conserving art for upcoming generations, not merely a family tradition. I sense Grandpa Gerald's presence every day as I pass through these hallways. He would be proud, I'm sure of it. Sometimes, when it's quiet in the gallery late at night, I reflect on how I almost gave up and allowed Marcus to turn this place into just another opulent development when I initially discovered the secret compartment in the floor. But I had learned a lot from Grandpa Gerald. Sometimes the finest riches are hidden from view. Additionally, some items have significantly higher values than their market value. There is no longer anything in the vault beneath the gallery. Although its contents have been returned to their proper locations across the globe, the area is nonetheless prepared in case it is ever needed again. A hidden chamber ready to guard the next historical artifact that needs to be preserved. And occasionally I share Grandpa Gerald's favorite quote with young artists who come to the exhibition with eyes that sparkle with the same fervor I once witnessed in his. True value isn't always visible at first glance. Sometimes the greatest treasures hide in plain sight, waiting for the right person to discover them. They never understand that I'm discussing more than just art. The gallery, which everyone believed to be useless, ended up being valuable not because of its contents but rather because of its legacy of preservation, protection, and the realization that some things are more valuable than all the money in the world. Marcus might have received the money from our parents' estate, but I gained something far more valuable: a goal, a purpose, and the opportunity to demonstrate that sometimes the best form of retaliation isn't getting even but rather doing the right thing. With its windows shining in the sunlight, the Mason Gallery is a tall building in the heart of Boston. It's no longer the dilapidated, dusty place my brother made fun of. It serves as a ray of hope, a defender of culture, and evidence that genuine value frequently extends well beyond appearances. And me, Janice Mason, the letdown who received the useless bequest, is no longer me. I am the guardian of a generation-spanning legacy. The guardian of a custom that prioritizes preservation over financial gain. And the evidence that, if you know where to look, the greatest things in life can occasionally be found shrouded in dust. Thanks for watching and being part of the drama. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a wild news story.